released tapes granting an astonishing look at the twisted mind of a serial killer. From Jack the Ripper to John Wayne Gacy, murderers who seem to choose their victims at random both terrify and fascinate us.
You're watching 34-year-old Israel Keys describe over coffee and a bagel his strategy for hunting and killing innocent people.
Israel Keys was born on January 7, 1978, in the quiet, old-fashioned town of Richmond, Utah. His mother smiled at the new baby, a boy. Deemed Israel a biblical title, the happy mother looked down at someone who would grow up to become a strong, young man. Through tumultuous labor, most likely at home, a miracle was now lying in her arms. Little Israel was the second of 10 children to be born on the rolling plains of their farm. As his father smiled down at the new bundle of joy, the Keys family had no idea the monster Israel would grow up to become.
There is no one who knows me, or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me, really.
Keys was homeschooled and raised strictly in the Mormon faith until the age of 5, when his family left the church and moved to a plot of land in Coville, Washington. As a child, Keys and his other siblings did not have access to what most deemed necessary for a growing child. Surrounded by dense forest, he was isolated from society. The family lived in poverty, owning a tightly packed one-room cabin where they were without electricity or running water. For years, some of the Keys children had been forced to sleep in a tent due to their cabin's small size. And to survive, the siblings were made to hunt their food, chop firewood, and work on local farms to support the family. This was no childhood.
Back when I was smart, I would let them come to me. Just remote area. Come go to a remote area that's not anywhere near where you live, but that other people go to as well.
After leaving one strict religion, the family moved on to the next. At their new farm, the family decided to leave Mormonism to attend services at a church called the Ark, which practiced white supremacist Christian ideology. Israel later described the Ark as an Amish-like church environment, except his indoctrination was far more cult-like. As he grew into his adolescence, his family, yet again, hopped to a stricter white supremacist church, the Christian Israel Covenant Church. This church taught British Israelism as a doctrine, which taught that the combining of races was abominable and deviant, and that Anglo-Saxons, white people, were to rule over perceived, quote, inferior races. As though it was his destiny all along, during the period of attending one of the authoritarian churches, the Keys family befriended the neighboring family of Chivi Kehoe, who was later convicted of a 1996 triple murder. This was chilling foreshadowing of what was to come.
Keys also told Agent Godin that he could relate to notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, who confessed to 30 murders before being executed in 1989. The two killers had similar methods.
This wasn't even close to the only warning sign. As a hobby, Keys hunted, quote, anything with a heartbeat, and freely admitted to his peers at the church in revolting detail to skinning a deer alive. Israel, filled with pride in his deeds, often retold to others how he would shoot at neighbors' windows with his BB gun, start fires in the woods, and break into houses for fun. By 14, it seemed there was no one who could stop him. Standing at an already staggering 6'2", he would roam the dense forest as he pleased. At one point, he did have a partner in crime, but due to Keys' extreme violence towards animals, even the fellow criminals started to avoid him. It seemed to the community, and to Israel, the world was already turning its back.
Investigators say Keys is a textbook serial killer. Like other famous killers in the past, he took pleasure in the act of taking a life.
A point where Keys took a somehow impossible turn for the worse was an incident involving a family friend's cat. Watching the animal roam in the distance, something inside of him shifted. Images of the animals he killed and violent acts he fantasized about flooded his mind as he approached. The cat most likely meowed, walked slowly towards him, and rubbed its furry head against his leg. Keys stiffened, tightened his fist, and drew closer to the kind animal. All was still until a quick movement rushed through the air. Filled with bloodlust, Keys grabbed the cat and forcefully bound it to a tree with a thick parachute cord. With surprise, it shook and hissed, biting at its restraints, but to no avail. Grabbing his .22 revolver, Keyes continuously beat and shot the animal, watching happily as the battered creature began circling the tree, eventually crashing into it, vomiting, and dying a gruesome death. Keyes later chuckled fondly as he recounted this act to his father, notably laughing at how the cat had vomited from the beating. Many believe that this is the moment Israel Keyes found his true lust for killing.
He talked about the rush that he got out of it, the adrenaline and kind of the high from doing it, and I think, unfortunately, I think he enjoyed what he was doing.
There is nothing probably greater than holding the power and control of someone's life and looking them in the eye and being able to control all of that is intoxicating to serial killers.
As a child, Keyes showed incredibly obvious warning signs, but still, in his own way, he tried to keep his life on track. He kept a journal from early childhood littered with Bible scriptures, documenting daily sins for which he felt shame, such as lusting after his girlfriend. With the constant pressure of the religion, he eventually cracked. Vowing an atheist, he shunned his family's beliefs and, in his mind, irrational lifestyle. He declared this newfound lack of belief to his parents, who he had previously made tireless and constant efforts to please. An intense and volatile argument ensued. With this simple moment, Israel's life as he knew it was flipped upside down. He was evicted. As soon as he was out, his parents instructed the younger siblings, who looked up to him at the time, to never have contact with him again. The family did as they were told. Filled with the anger of his church's denial of him, the strict rules of his previous religion, and the isolation of the only environment he had ever known, Keyes decided to turn to Satanism, with plans of committing a ritualistic murder. It was the summer of 1997. He was on his own now and had moved to Oregon. The air was warm and the water of the river, where many were inner tubing, was cool and comfortable. This was the life of a bachelor. Free from his family, on his own, working, and ready for the ladies. This is where he spotted a young girl, between the ages of 14 to 18, with her friends. She had sandy blonde hair, and to him, was the ideal woman. She was white, blonde, and beautiful. She was perfect. A perfect target to kill. Luring her out of the water with some sort of ruse, maybe offering alcohol or drugs, Keyes isolated the young girl in the forest nearby. Trapping her with nowhere to escape, he brutally sexually assaulted her. As he intended to kill her, he decided it wasn't worth it. He allowed her to live.
She was scared, but also just talking about random stuff. I don't know, it was weird. I was just convinced that I had screwed up that time in Oregon because, I let her go.
He indicated he never let another go after that.
From 1998 to 2001, Keyes decided to take a different approach to work. Maybe he wanted to turn his life around, be done with the idea of killing and rape, maybe the job was convenient, or maybe he was drawn to the power which it came with. Either way, Israel enlisted in the U.S. Army. During this time he served at Fort Lewis, Fort Hood, and abroad in Egypt. From being isolated on a rural farm to a faraway place such as Egypt was a huge jump for him, but not enough to slow his disgusting impulses. Keyes did not admit to any murders during his service in the army, but he did admit to 2 attempts of rape. The first was with a prostitute while in Egypt, and the second was with a college student in Israel.
Keyes told investigators he waited until he completed a 3-year stint in the Army before he stalked his next victim.
You told us it wasn't long when you got out of the military that you killed somebody, and it was that sort of feeling that you needed to do something. It was hard to resist. And you faced 40 times.
Instead of sticking to a specific victim profile, Keyes targeted seemingly random people who crossed his path. He would sit and wait in places like parks, cemeteries, or campgrounds, because he knew there would be no witnesses around. He even traveled to kill. In 2011, he flew to Chicago before going to Vermont, where he killed Bill and Lorraine Currier, 2 of his many victims. He covered a lot of ground in the United States, which allowed him to get many opportunities for new victims. He traveled outside of the US as well, which could have also been part of his killing spree. While he traveled to lessen his chances of being found, Keyes would pay only in cash and take out the battery in his phone so he couldn't be tracked. His killing process was extremely detailed. While he traveled across the country, Israel hid murder equipment like guns, ammunition, and chemicals to later destroy the bodies. He studied FBI profilers and famous serial killers like Ted Bundy. According to Maureen Callahan's book about him, American Predator, she said that Keyes got plastic surgery done to be a better killer. Doing this, he possibly could have changed his fingerprints and removed body hair for less evidence to be at the crime scenes. After the rampage in his teenage years, many believe he moved on to become the Boca Killer, named after the town he targeted, Boca Raton, Florida. The first case linked Keyes to the murder of Randy Gorenberg, a young woman who he abducted from a shopping mall parking lot in March of 2007. Within an hour of the abduction, she was shot twice and dumped as if trash. The second in the list of the Boca Killer's crimes was the kidnapping of an unidentified woman who claimed she and her toddler were abducted from a shopping mall parking lot in August 2007. The kidnapper, most likely Keyes, wore a mask and sunglasses, but the victim was able to identify some of his features. She described the man as tall, athletically built, and with long hair. At the time, this was exactly what Keyes looked like. He took the two, forced the terrified mother to withdraw cash from an ATM, and let them go unharmed. No one knows why he decided not to go through with his bloodlust this time. Many of his movements have been proven to be sporadic. Maybe he let her go for the same reason he let the other young girl so many years ago free as well. The third Boca case was the murder of Nancy Bachicchio, a 47-year-old mother, and her 7-year-old daughter, Joey. These two were once again in a mall parking lot, found fatally shot in their vehicle in December 2007. The police have said that Keyes admitted to murdering in Boca, but he never specified exactly what happened.
In New York State, committing one in Washington State, thousands of miles difference. There's no way the local police are going to identify him as a serial killer.
While Keyes was in Washington State, he claimed to have killed 4 people and be the subject of an active investigation by state police and the FBI. This is what he claimed to be happening, but he did not have any felony or criminal records in Washington. Even still, when he told this to the police, it led them to review unsolved murders and missing persons cases from the state to try and link them to Keyes. He most likely did murder while in the state and truly believed that the police were after him when in reality law enforcement had no idea. During the night of June 8, 2011, Keyes decided to do another one of his regular robberies, but once again, something snapped inside of him. As he broke into the courier's home, he noticed that Bill and Lorraine were fast asleep. He woke them up, tied them with rope, and drove them to an abandoned farmhouse. This is where he shot Bill and sexually assaulted and strangled Lorraine. Bill and Lorraine's bodies have never been found to this day. Keyes confessed to a murder in New York State. Authorities were not able to determine any information about the victim, but they still regarded the confession as credible. Eugene Hyatt, Cami Valendroff, Anita Scott, Wendy D. Hoop, Stephen Mason, Deborah Feldman, James Tidwell are all suspected victims of Israel Keyes. Some have more evidence behind them than others.
Deborah Feldman, we had talked about her before.
Yeah.
New Jersey is looking into her more. FBI is looking into her more in that situation.
All right.
Thought maybe that'd be a place where we could start.
No, I mean, not as far as I'm concerned.
Deborah Feldman was 48 years old and on April 9, 2009 was murdered by Israel Keyes. She was last seen on April 8 by her own son. He didn't question her disappearance as she was a prostitute and drug addict. When her son last saw her, he had a fight with her. She asked for the money he had just made. While Israel Keyes never confessed to this murder, while being showed Deborah's picture, he told the police, "I don't want to talk about her yet." Israel Keyes described a murder on the East Coast occurring on April 9, 2009. He described the woman as a drug addict and a prostitute which Keyes was known to frequent. He claims to have buried the body in the Tupper Lake area in New York. Samantha Koenig was Keyes' last confirmed victim, meaning he confessed to killing her. She was only 18 years old and worked as a coffee booth employee in Anchorage, Alaska. On February 1, 2012, Keyes walked into her shop and made a decision to kill. Calmly, he threatened and kidnapped Koenig from her workplace, took her belongings and sexually assaulted her. He held her for a day until he eventually killed her. After he brutally murdered Samantha, he dumped her body in a shed and fled to New Orleans to go on a 2-week cruise trip with his family in the Gulf of Mexico. When he returned to the body, he removed her from the shed, applied makeup on her, and sewed her eyes open to make her seem alive. He took a photo of her posed and demanded $30,000 in ransom for her release. After that, he dismembered her body and disposed of it in Matanuska Lake. When Keyes demanded his ransom money, the police were able to track withdrawals from the account. During that time, the police found a video of Koenig's abduction but refused to release it to the public at the time. On February 16, 2012, Keyes robbed a bank in Azle, Texas, wearing a wig as a disguise. This was right after Jimmy Tidwell went missing the previous day. It was later revealed this wig was real human hair resembling the hair of Jimmy Tidwell. Israel had scalped him, took his hair, and used it as a disguise for one of his robberies. Keyes was a unique serial killer as he could potentially be linked to 11 murders in the U.S. Most serial killers have a profile for the type of victims they choose, but he always chooses random citizens. He would drive up to 1,000 miles to perform the murders. Israel extensively planned for each murder to make them perfect and take the safest routes in order to not be caught. In addition to his murder sprees, he is linked to the burglary of 20 to 30 homes and the robbing of multiple banks. For the Courier murders, Keyes flew to Chicago, where he rented a car to drive 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, to Vermont. He then used the kill kit he had hidden 2 years earlier to perform the murders. Israel knew his time was running out as he heard the sirens behind his speeding car. Turning into the parking lot, he held his breath and calmly put his hands on the steering wheel. Talking to the officers lightheartedly, he held on to the hope of it being a routine traffic stop, and it was, until the officers spotted something. It was cash stained with dye packs in the back seat of his car. On the morning of March 13, 2012, he was arrested. Investigators found him by circulating a bulletin to all police to look for his car, which had been used at ATMs to withdraw money from one of the victims' accounts. Keyes' car matched this description and was stopped after he drove over the speed limit. Besides the cash indicating a bank robbery, Koenig's ATM card and cell phone were also discovered in Keyes' car. Israel was subsequently extradited to Alaska, where he realized it was time. He confessed to the Koenig murder and then quickly got a lawyer.
From the beginning, there's certain aspects of the things that I've done that I would prefer never became public.
If something else were to get out, especially in a different area or something, and now there's the whole Nia Bay aspect of it now too. It's like my kids living in Nia Bay now, and gossip is the town pastime. So
this was it, the case. Israel Keyes' trial was scheduled for March 2013. He knew that this would happen eventually, and while incarcerated he was cooperative and even confessed to a few of his crimes. This wasn't without reason though. He told the investigators he wanted to be executed before the end of the year, not for his sake, but for his daughters. Yes, he was a family man, if you could call him that. He knew the backlash his daughter could experience from his actions and the power of media attention. This did not stop reporters from getting a hold of the story, and soon everything was out and he and his daughter, inadvertently, were on the chopping block. Once everything was released to the public, he stopped cooperating with the investigators. Now there was no point. He was going to die with his mouth shut. During a public hearing on Wednesday, May 23, 2012, Keyes was antsy. With his knees bouncing and body shifting from side to side, he was not just fidgeting in his seat, but creating a shiv out of wood shavings to unlock his own cuffs. He did so successfully, but as he attempted to run, a police officer used a taser to prevent him from escaping, and he was in custody once again.
What are you holding in your hands now?
These are items that were seized out of Israel Keyes' jail cell.
Has the public ever been shown this before?
No. These skulls are drawn in blood.
The blood, where do you believe the blood came from?
I think it was Israel's blood.
His execution wasn't soon enough. As he sat and contemplated his career, he grabbed what he had stashed for later. A razor blade. After failing to die from hanging moments earlier, he slit his wrists with the contraband and died. He killed himself and left an ominous suicide note. It was poorly written and the note yielded nothing about his victims. He passed away on December 2, 2012 in his jail cell. The FBI had called his suicide note serial killer poetry. Here is the suicide note.
Land of the free, land of the lie, land of the scheme, Americanize. Now that I have you held tight, I will tell you a story. Speak soft in your ear so you know that it's true. You're my love at first sight, and though you're scared to be near me, my words penetrate your thoughts now in an intimate prelude. I looked in your eyes. They were so dark, warm, and trusting, as though you would not a warrior care. The more gaius the game, the better potential to fill up those pools with your fear. Your face framed in dark curls like a portrait. The sun shone through highlights of red. What color, I wonder? And how straight will it turn plastered back with the sweat of your blood? Your wet lips were a promise of a secret, unspoken, nervous laughter as it burst like a pulse of blood from your throat. There will be no more laughter here. I feel your body tense up. My hand now on your shoulder, your eyes. Forget the lady called Luck. She does not abide near me, for her powers don't extend to those who are dead. Would that I keep you, let you be the master of your own fate, knowing full well what's at stake. My captive butterfly, colorful wings my hand smears. I somehow repaint them with the punishment and tears. Violent metamorphosis, emerge my dark moth princess. I would come often and worship on the altar of your flesh. You shudder with revulsion and try to shrink far from me. I'll have you tied down and begging to become my Stockholm sweetie. Okay, talk is over. Words are placid and weak. Back it with action or it all comes off cheap. Watch close while I work now. Feel the electric shock of my touch. Open your trembling flower, or your petals I'll crush.